Hi everybody, welcome. So pleased you're here with us this evening. Hope you're enjoying the course, the Managing Behaviour for Learning course, in conjunction with Pivotal, us from Pivotal, and also the National STEM Learning Centre. Today I'm here with Ollie Frith. Ollie's our Head of Training at Pivotal Education, and I'm Ellie Dix. I'm one of the directors at Pivotal. Now, you've brilliantly sent in loads of questions for Ollie to answer, and I'll be putting those to him this evening. But also, there are some questions that we're going to leave for the next webinar, because this course, Ollie, is split over 5 weeks, isn't it? So we are looking really at the first couple of weeks, the content of the first couple of weeks in this webinar today. So if you've sent through questions and you think we've deliberately ignored them, we haven't. We've got a bank of questions that are more related to content in the weeks coming up. So those sorts of things are sanctions, managing specific interventions with learners who aren't being compliant, restorative conversations, and more extreme behaviours. So don't worry, we'll answer those questions, but we're going to focus on some other things today. So we're going to look mainly at managing your own behaviour, developing consistent practice, embedding routines and simplifying rules and that sort of thing. Okay, brilliant. So, Ollie, we'll kick off with the first question. So here's a question from Maria Lopez Ferrero. She says, how can I make learners understand that there are things that they have to do, whether they like them or not, without resorting to the easy threat of yelling?
Yeah, I read your question, Maria, and I know that you took some ownership over that easy fall into behaviour of I just shout, I threat, and I know that you owned the fact that you knew that probably wasn't the best way of responding. And I think I want to make really clear that human response where the emotions get the better of you and you do raise your voice or you do impose some kind of sanction that you think was a bit extreme, I think that's quite a normal thing. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't make teachers who do shout bad people bad teachers. It just makes them human beings. And I think it's really important to understand that, yes, in an ideal world, we can all control our emotions and our behaviour perfectly well. But sometimes we do make mistakes, and that doesn't make us bad. What we need to be really clear to do is, if we do make a mistake, then we use that as an opportunity to model to our learners, when I make a mistake, this is how I get it, this is how I make it right. Rather than sort of worrying about coming across as weak or not being honest with our learners and hiding away from our own mistakes, I think it's really important that as an adult, we take ownership over our responsibilities, which is our own emotions and our own behaviour, and we use that as an opportunity to say to our learners, look, I shouldn't have shouted, I shouldn't have raised my voice, that was wrong of me. It doesn't excuse your behaviour, but I want you to hear me apologise because I accept the fact that I behaved badly as well. And I think those sorts of conversations go a really long way in terms of establishing relationships with your students, which is an absolute common thread through all the work that we do at Pivotal with behaviour. And as teachers, as you know, that's the foundation of being able to teach anyone anything. I need to trust my learners and they need to trust me as the teacher. And so relationships are absolutely key. So being able to model our own calm behaviour, being able to model our expectations, it's crazy for me to shout at a learner who's behaving in a disrespectful way. This idea of do as I say, not as I do. If I'm relying upon the hierarchy or the status of me as the adult, me as the teacher, you as the child, you as the learner, as my sole behaviour management strategy, then I'm always going to come unstuck.
And I think, isn't it right, Ollie, that you can, nobody can be consistent 100% of the time.
No, for sure. And I think that if you are committed to what you're doing and you're consistent 80% of the time, then the other 20% when you make mistakes, you apologise, you make amends, you make great efforts openly to make it right, to repair the damage. I think your students will forgive you for the 2 out of 10 times. That consistent response is really key. So you asked me about how can I make my learners understand? Well, first of all, you can't make them, and the word understand is really key there. Is that they need to understand why they're learning what they're learning, and if they don't understand and it's just being done to them, then at some point there's going to be some pushback. So I think we need to sort of track back a little bit and really start to build into our behaviour management strategies this idea that we bring our learners with us. We are very clear about our boundaries, we're very consistent, we remain calm as often as possible, and we sort of demonstrate to our learners that this is what you can expect from me. Because if we have an unpredictable response, and sometimes we're friendly, sometimes we're calm, other times we're tired and stressed, and so we shout and threaten, then that causes a real confusion for our learners. So I think we need to be very careful that what we're not doing is making them understand. What we're doing is providing them an environment where they feel comfortable and empowered to want to understand for themselves.
Absolutely. And I think also, Wally, it's about, what are we asking? How many things are we asking them to do? What are the things that are really necessary for them to do? I mean, I think that we're all as teachers guilty of loading extra additional things, and it can feel for a student like they've got so many things that they're required to do that they can. It was a bit like being a teacher. You have so many things passed down to you that you're required to do that sometimes you think, I can't do anything.
Yeah,
and I don't really want to do any of this.
We've got a range of age groups that we're working with, or that teachers on this course are working with. And even within those age ranges, you've got students who have maybe memory retention challenges. And so being sort of just bombarded with a list of expectations of you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Some students are going to struggle with going beyond one or two of those instructions or expectations. And so in terms of our learners understanding, that's where we need to go back to, because that they have to have that basis of recognition and understanding of why they're doing it, so then there's not so much pushback.
And I think also some of the things that we're going to talk about later on in terms of routines, when you've got your routines really embedded, the sorts of things you're requiring people to do become habitual.
Well, that's the thing, and I think there's in week 2 you've looked at the rules and routines, and when we really get them established and embedded within the classroom, so everyone has that understanding of this is how we do it, then you can save yourself a lot of time of those constant battles of, can you take your coat off, can you sit in the right place, this is the seating plan. If we have that routine in place, the expectation is already there, so I don't have to have those conversations, because my learners know that they come in, their bag gets taken down, their books are out, whatever it is, their equipment's ready, as an automatic expectation. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, good, thank you. Let's move on to the second question. Right, this is quite an involved question. It's from Evangelina. She says, I always struggle with the idea of picking the battle. If I'm alone with the student, then it's fine to ignore certain behaviours while I'm trying to achieve something else, something more important. However, it can be tricky if the behaviour happens in a class and other students tend to see it as a double standard. How do you stay consistent whilst choosing to let some things go?
Okay, so there's a couple of things there, isn't there? And I'll unpick them one at a time. So first of all, this idea of picking the battle. Yes, there's plenty of times where when we chase secondary behaviours, for example, we're dealing with a response to behaviour, and we think this is the conversation, then something else gets thrown into the mix, and all of a sudden we go off on a tangent, we go down a cul-de-sac. 10, 15 minutes later, we've argued with a learner about something completely different from the original behaviour. We have to be very careful to pick our battles. Am I going to argue about a learner coming late to my class 10 seconds after the bell? Am I going to have a 5-minute cut-off? I need to make these sorts of decisions and be considered and planned about my response, so I am able to go, okay, do you know what, there's got to be some kind of flexibility. And in terms of other learners witnessing and observing my response to different learning behaviours, I think it's really important that we set expectations publicly, that we make, because sometimes learners need to feel safe, don't they? They need to know that I'm dealing with the behaviour. So although we clearly have the message that you praise in public and you reprimand in private, and they have that clear separation, that distinction between the two, I think sometimes just my learners in my whole class need to know that I am going to deal with it, not in a revengeful, unpleasant way, but just saying to my whole class, maybe that I will never give up on any of my students. At the same time, maybe I'm making eye contact or looking at the student that is exhibiting the undesirable behaviour. So
making a little note of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So making it very clear to my class that I'm going to follow up, making it very clear to them that don't worry, it's okay, you're safe. And then a private little note to myself to make sure that when I speak to that learner at break time, at lunchtime, after school, then this is when I'm going to have those conversations. So I need to be very clear that, yes, this is a class, this is our experience, our learning experience that we're all going to share together. But the behaviour responses need to be very much a case of my student and me. That's our behaviour is our business,
yeah.
And no one else's. And so it has to be a one-to-one thing that cannot be done publicly just so I can satisfy my other students' needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, the idea that about what you are choosing to do as a teacher. You are not going to ignore certain behaviours, but you're choosing not to deal with them immediately.
Well, there's a big difference between that, isn't there? And a few years ago, that was quite a sort of a popular thing, wasn't it? We ignore the bad and we focus on the good. Well, we can't do that, because if you ignore bad behaviour, particularly that's attention-seeking behaviour, that's just going to escalate.
Yeah.
And so you do have to deal with it, but not first, not immediately. You get to set when you have those discussions, and so those discussions and that follow-up has to happen for sure, and you have to be consistent, and so your students absolutely know that you will have that conversation.
It's the certainty of follow-up, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's the not leaving anything to kind of to each individual thinking, oh, maybe she will, maybe she won't, maybe he will, maybe he won't. They have to know that if they choose to do something like kicking over their chair when they're leaving the room after a problem, then you're going to pick up on that picking the chair up thing at some point. They're not going to come back.
That's the thing, it's the absolute certainty that will be followed up, but it'll be followed up at the right time. I'm not going to use learning time to have behaviour conversations. And there'll be more of that in week 4 when we talk about scripted responses and how much time should we commit to that. But in terms of that consistency and the importance of consistency of the message, I think it's the follow-up that's really key. That as Ellie said, the certainty that I will follow up, but at the right time.
Yeah, and I think the follow-up's really interesting because, it seems like, I haven't got enough time to follow up all these things this week. But of course, you put the effort in at the start and you become dogged about it. And then people don't question whether you're going to follow up. They just know that you will. So some of the behaviours are rectified in the class. So it pays dividends later, doesn't it?
In exactly the same way as this week when we were looking at routines. You get them embedded, then there's the certainty straight away. So in the same way with my response to behaviour, I will relentlessly follow up to deal with that behaviour in the right time, in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you, Ollie. Okay, the next question. This one from Kathleen Clark. She says, can you give some tips for supply teachers or cover teachers for gaining respect and control within quite a short time frame or very little time frame?
Okay, for sure. This is a great question because clearly there are a lot of cover teachers, supply teachers that for many students, and I certainly remember when I was at school, it was sport, wasn't it? You see your supply teacher walking down the corridor, and there's a whisper that rushes around your class. There's a real entertainment factor about how far can we really push. I mean, it's cruel, but when you're a child, you don't think about it on that level. And so, yes, I think it's absolutely right to think about what can I do, what quick wins, what easy wins can I bring with me that is going to actually combat that and challenge that expectation of we're going to walk all over you as a supply teacher. And what I would suggest is, again, I mentioned relationships earlier on, is that yes, you can't have built up a relationship with students over the period of a term. It might be the first time you interact with a student, but just think about when you meet people for the first time, what is it that attracts you or grabs you and connects you to these people that you feel interested in? And I think that's something that your learners want from you. They're testing you. They're waiting to find out, where are your weaknesses? Where are your strengths? Are you going to interest me? Are you going to enthuse me? Are you going to inspire me? Or are you just going to be? Are you going to bore me? And it will just feel like babysitting. And I think the fact that you've got this anticipation from your students, I think you can play on. And if you bring something of yourself, a little bit of magic, a little bit of, it's very difficult to actually put it into words, I think, to define, but I think just
Personality.
a little bit of your own personality, that it's not about you revealing yourself and what you've gone on holiday and what you've done at the weekend, but just something that makes your learners a little bit intrigued.
Yes.
I think, great movies, great television, great books work on that premise of I want to read the next page. There's a bit of buy-in. And I think as an educator, especially if you haven't had the luxury of building relationships over a term or even a year, then I think you have to have those quick wins by going, okay, what can I do? I can inject a little bit of self, a little bit of magic that sets that standard of this is going to be something that you want to be part of. And I just want to add on that is that I think some adults believe, and it's my belief, that as educators, you have earned the right to be respected by the people that you work with. But I don't think children see it that way. I don't think that an 11-year-old would look at a teacher and say, well, do you know, you've studied really hard for 3 or 4 years and you've written some wonderful essays and you've got my respect. They don't think like that. So actually you do need to prove to them that you deserve their respect. And I think anyone that goes in commanding it and expecting it, I think already you're on the back foot there.
Because actually, Ollie, I think it's more about for the children. Do I like this person? Do I like them? Do I want to spend the lesson with this person? And that's something that's much more at the forefront of a child's mind.
Yeah, and I think
whether I respect them or not.
And not just do I like them, but do I feel safe with them?
Yeah.
I think that's really key. So approaching with a smile, or even being, if possible, if you're able to be at the door before the learners, standing on the door, doing the meet and greet, all the things that we've talked about over the last 2 weeks, and just being part of the learning experience. So you're not just a stranger, you're someone that actually they want to invest themselves into because you're willing to do that for them.
Yes, absolutely. I think the meet and greet is so important in that situation, isn't it? If you're a cover supervisor, a supply teacher coming to the class for the first time, we talk about these small acts of botheredness, don't we, Ollie? It's not about having full-blown relationships with every child, and you can't get that immediately anyway, even if you're their permanent teacher. But showing the child or the learner that you care, and that you care enough to shake their hand or at least say hello to them and smile at them, each individual as they're walking in, for a moment they feel important. Yeah,
I think so. And I think also in terms of just sort of key ideas for people who are working as supply or cover supervisors, this idea of finding out what are the routines and the rules that are already in place. What do they adhere to with their current teacher, and how can I be consistent matching that? And so that all of a sudden they say, oh, okay, hang on, you know what we do in this classroom. There are no weaknesses. There is no chink in your armour because you've had a conversation with my teacher. And I think setting those standards down already. So finding out and doing a bit of homework, sort of a bit of planning and organisation. So not just turning up and looking for the lesson plan that you're just going to sit and just regurgitate.
And it's not always possible, but it is, quite a few, a good percentage of the times it is possible to do that, at least to some degree.
I mean, I remember when I was going into schools and doing cover work, I would always go onto the school's websites and find the behaviour policy. Simple things that you can spend 10, 15, 20 minutes, just, a lot of them are publicly available, and just spend that time going, okay, what are the rules of this school? And how can I match them with my responses and the way I manage my classroom behaviour management strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question then. It's a good one. What proactive strategies can you suggest for managing ringleaders that really convince other students to be disruptive? And this is from Ana Mañas Fuentes.
I think nicely said. This is a key one, isn't it? Because it can be the bane of your teacher's of a teacher's life, where there just seems to be one or two ringleaders that just seem to hold court. They control, they dominate, and everyone falls in line. And then very quickly, you can feel like it's 30 students against one.
Yeah, they can be very powerful.
It can be hugely powerful, and I think what's key there. I've mentioned relationships a few times, but I think what's really key is to not try and stop them from doing that, because I think that's a little bit too late. I think you need to be a little bit more preemptive than that. And I think that what you need to start to do is to think, okay, can I find out what's important to these learners? What makes them feel valued? What can I tap into? What can I invest a bit of myself prior to the lesson, during lunch break? Maybe just sitting down in the canteen and saying, oh, would you mind if I joined you for lunch? Even if it's just 30 seconds, a minute, and then saying, oh, thank you, I really enjoyed your company, and going, and just investing a little bit more of yourself. Will start to build relationships, so they see you as someone who they're not there to battle against because they see you as not fighting against them. When you work alongside, they're much more likely to be supportive of you rather than feeling like there's this attack and defend, win-lose scenario that goes on. And I think what we need to do is dig a little bit deeper. Why are they wanting to do that? Why are they trying to empower themselves? Why are they feeling the need to have this battle? There's always going to be some underlying causes of this behaviour. So let's try and dig a little bit deeper to try and find out what can we do to create that win-win scenario. So we're in this together. This is our learning experience. It's not me doing this to you and you're being resentful and begrudging. It's a way of us collaborating effectively in our learning experience.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting because, we bandy around the term hard to reach and we forget what it actually means. These students very many times are hard to reach and we have to be really persistent. And they're like that for a reason. They've been let down a lot of times by adults often. They maybe don't have adults coming up to them and having positive interactions with them, possibly not at home, possibly no other adult in the school is doing that. So it takes time. You can't expect to turn these behaviours around immediately. You have to be really persistent.
And what they're doing is testing. They're pushing those boundaries because they want to push them as far as they will go until they learn where they will stop, and then they'll cross those boundaries because that's how they discover. And I think what they're trying to do is saying, will you just be another adult who walks away? Will you just be another adult who gives up on me? And I think that if we can embrace the idea that what they're doing is testing us and we're going to succeed at that test and we're going to succeed by not giving up, not giving in, I think that the relationships will be solid because of that.
Absolutely. And, one of the strategies that we often use for hard to reach students is very simply trying to find them every day and engineer a walk past where you can just smile and say hello. And it was very powerful to me when I first heard this strategy when I was teaching in a really difficult school, because Paul said to me, you might be the only person that smiles at them and says hello in their day. You might be the only adult that does that all week. So, you stick with it. And for a start, those students might react really badly.
Well, because it'll be an odd thing for them. They won't know how to respond. How do I respond to someone being nice to me? That's not a usual thing. Normally people shout. And I can cope with that because that's what I understand, that dynamic. And all of a sudden I've got someone being warm and nurturing towards me. Yeah. That's confusing to begin with. But you have to persist and continue. And I just want to say about that idea that what often we do is with those times, those discussions, is that we wait for it to go wrong. Then there's some behaviour. Then we call people in for conversations, and we spend they lose lunchtime or they're in detention after school, and then we choose to try and have those conversations then. And what happens is they're just resentful, and they see us as that authoritative, punitive response that is just something that they're going to begrudge. Whereas what we need to do is we need to create those scenarios before the punishment, as it were. Yeah. So we need to look for those opportunities. We need to invite them to come and sit with us at lunchtime before they've done anything wrong, to say, I'd really like your opinion about the next lesson and your help in planning. You're a really positive a leader. Yeah. And so actually can we work together to create what we're going to develop over the next term and bring them in and get them involved, not after they've done something wrong, but before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. And what you'll find is that week 5 on the restorative conversations can have a really big impact on what happens after those difficult incidents has happened. So they're not just having punitive sanctions, you're actually reintegrating them with a conversation and a personal one-to-one discussion about what happened. That's really powerful as well. Okay, thank you, Ollie. Okay, so next question, Ollie. Should allowances be made for the challenging behaviour of learners with autistic spectrum disorders and possibly other complex behaviour needs? How do you differentiate for certain behaviour needs whilst still maintaining consistency? So this is a question really from Joe Clark. What do you think about that?
Okay, so the first question, yes, is the answer. You should make allowances, but there's a difference between being fair and equal. That we need to separate the two and understand what it is that we're doing. I think schools are really good at differentiating for ability, and we have different coloured tables, and we have all sorts of different opportunities and different level tasks and whatnot. But what we don't necessarily remember to do quite so well is to differentiate for ability. Differentiate for behaviour. Yeah. And we need to do that just as comfortably as we do for ability. Different learners will have different needs, and certainly if they are on the autistic spectrum, or if they have different severe or complex needs, then that is going to impact and affect their decision making. And of course we have to value that and to build that into our problem solving. Our responses to behaviour need to be about problem solving, not just taking people through a process. Because if we're just giving a punishment that's designed to be a deterrent, well, for a lot of learners, that deterrent doesn't exist. They're not interested. They live in the moment, they're impulsive, and they can't consider the promise of reward or the threat of punishment. And so we need to build into that very much routinely the idea that we are helping our learners become problem solvers. So we do need to reflect on what are our learners' needs. What actually is going to benefit them to help them become much more self-regulating in their behaviour. I don't want my learners to behave themselves because they're afraid of the consequence. I want them to learn to behave themselves because it's the right thing to do. You wouldn't expect a wheelchair user, for example, to just get up, stand up and go for a run. You'd have the understanding that their needs were different from someone who wasn't a wheelchair user. And so I think the same reflection needs to be applied to children with complex needs and other learning difficulties and challenges, because I think that understanding, that connection, that empathy really helps us build those relationships. Now, from my experience, I would say it's often the adults that have the issue with the fairness. That's not fair. Why does he get to go on that trip? Why does she allowed to behave like that when others wouldn't be allowed? And I tend to observe children being very comfortable with that difference. I was in a class of 6-year-olds, and there was a boy who had autism, and he was walking around, very, very challenging behaviour. The teacher was great, but the students were even better, because there was one girl that just came up to me and said, "Oh, that's Adam. He just struggles with the little things, and that's okay, because he's really nice." And the 6-year-old's attitude to what was important to her wasn't that Adam walked around the room and sort of had a few difficult moments, was that actually he was nice and kind, and that was what was important. And so I think sometimes it's the adults that have to let go, and we can learn a lot from the children that we work with.
Yes, I think it's really interesting because there are certain points in lessons that don't lend themselves to children with really challenging behaviour being included properly. That if you are the kind of teacher that talks to demands the attention of the class while you're talking for long periods of time, you can expect more problems with that sort of disruption. That's an example, and I'm not for a minute suggesting that this person does that. But it's really easy to fall into those traps that you teach to the mass, that you teach to the behaviours that you yourself would, exhibit, and forget about those other behaviours. And really what we want is inclusion. And you can't get inclusion if you're not going to differentiate. You have to. And
that's the inclusion in the true sense of the term, not let's remove the children that we can put them in a unit and call that inclusion.
I'm not talking about that.
Inclusion within your classroom.
Yeah, we're not talking about exclusion rooms called inclusion rooms. We're talking about truly inclusive classrooms where adults are managing the different sorts of people in the room and tailoring the learning and the interventions and the behaviour for learning to them. Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you, Ollie. Okay. New question now from Tina Bupari. how do I deal with colleagues that have different behaviour management beliefs and strategies? And she actually wrote quite a lot longer question, which is, I think she's specifically referring to some more old-fashioned colleagues who are quite entrenched in their own understanding of what behaviour management should be, who are possibly less friendly and more dictatorial.
Yeah, I read the full question. It did seem that she was talking that she'd been advised to not be friendly.
Yeah.
And so my first thing I want to make really clear is that and this isn't a judgment on Tina, but certainly an important thing to note, that the notion of being friendly but not friends. I think there's a clear distinction that we need to make, that there's nothing wrong with me being kind and friendly and warm and nurturing towards my learners. They don't want me to be their friend, but they do want to feel safe with me. And so we have to play with that connection with our learners. But I don't think, from reading Tina's question, I don't think that it came across that she was trying to be their friend. I think genuinely she wanted to be very friendly and warm, and like you said, other colleagues and senior colleagues were suggesting that was problematic. Now, I've not come across many learners, or if any learners, that have said, you're just being too friendly. Can you stop being friendly, please?
Yeah.
I've heard plenty of learners say, I'd like you to stop shouting at me.
Yeah.
Can you stop being mean? Yeah, for sure. But I've never come across being friendly as problematic. So the key here really is, what can you change as an individual teacher or as an educator? What are you in control with? Because for sure, we're talking about a bigger global organisational thing, aren't we? About sort of the culture of the school that or the college that you work in. And so what can you change? Because that's a big deal. You can't just change the culture of the whole organisation, but you can look at the culture in your classroom. If you're getting good results, if you're having great relationships with your students, you have students who want to be there, who want to learn, I'd find it hard to understand why someone would be critical of how friendly you are being. So I would get you to think about, what are you doing to embed that culture in your classroom? That idea of, this is how we do it here. You come into this classroom and this is how you feel safe, and this is how you learn, and this is how we work, and this is how we collaborate and work together. Clearly here at Pivotal, we do a lot of work on a whole school cultural organisational level, and we do a lot of work with senior leaders at looking at how we can embed the whole culture of the school to have, not just in a classroom, this is how we do it, but in the whole institution, this is how we do it here, and celebrating that. But for you as an individual teacher, yes, be very comfortable with the fact that being friendly and warm and nurturing is not problematic. And if it's problematic for other colleagues, then I would try and have conversations with them and find out why. Why is me being in this way difficult for you? Because maybe what it's doing is it's highlighting the fact that they're not. Yeah. And so what people will do is they'll transfer their issue. I've got an issue because students come to me and say, why are you not as nice as so-and-so? And rather than looking at that and addressing their needs to be kinder or warmer, they will then
why are you being so nice?
Yeah, and they'll blame you.
Yeah.
And if those conversations are ineffective, I'm not here to tell people where they should work, but personally, if I was working in a school that I absolutely did not feel like the culture was a good fit for me, then I'd be looking for work in a school that actually did match my philosophies and the culture that I want to be part of.
Values. Yeah. I think it's interesting because there are a range of different situations that could be happening here. You could have one colleague who's possibly your line manager who's really, uncomfortable with the way that you're, or with the difference in the approach. Or it could be much more systemic across the whole school. And we do have schools like that where everything's about punitive sanctions, where it's about control and compliance rather than behaviour for learning. And there are plenty of schools like that, and they are uncomfortable places to work, and you do feel like a lone voice. What we've seen time and time again, though, is that those are the biggest voices in a place, actually, and the loudest voices, the ones that want control and compliance and sanctions and punitive systems. But when you start to scratch below the surface, you usually find a lot of other people who believe the same way that you do. And it's about how you get those voices to rise up. And you may or may not be able to do that as an individual teacher, but I should look for the people that are aligned with you, and as far as you can, communicate with them. And
yeah, it goes back to, again, that hierarchy, doesn't it? Is that people tend to, some people use that status as their sole behaviour management strategy. And I think, years ago, and I found out it's being recent, the advice given still is that, teachers were being told, don't smile till Christmas.
Yeah.
And you think, why wouldn't you? And someone recently said to me, well, I was told, don't smile till Easter. And so, when do you smile then? And I think the smile is such a powerful human connectivity, that why wouldn't we want to do that with our learners? Why wouldn't we want to be friendly? Why wouldn't we want to be calm and kind and nurturing, to establish a learning environment that did feel safe, that said, we're in this together and you're okay.
Yeah, actually, students can't learn if they don't feel safe. The bit of their brains that's open to learning is just that it closes if they feel under threat. So if you've got teachers that are extremely angry or are ruling by fear, they won't get the children learning in the way they ought to be learning. That's why we need a different approach, and that's why we've got to have children in the room feeling safe. It doesn't work any other way. Okay, let's move on. So a question here from Fiona Duffel. How do you deal with learners who are slow to start activities? It's always the same people, they've always got an excuse, they just don't get on and start the activity. Ollie. Okay,
so this is where having your routines in place is absolutely critical. Having a routine isn't just a case of at the start of term or the first lesson saying, this is my expectation, this is what you'll do, and then having the expectation that your learners will just comply. Teachers who manage behaviour really, really well are relentless in their embedding of that routine. They don't stop teaching and modelling that routine until the learners absolutely have it. And so we need to separate the learners who just need to be brought into that routine a little bit more and the saboteurs, because sometimes someone saying, I don't know what to do, they might be genuine. And just because it frustrates us as the educator doesn't stop it from being genuine. Yes, I accept there are times where it is just deliberate and it's defiance to the max. But we need to be able to separate that. So until we can define what the intention is, we have to be very secure in our knowledge that we have embedded that routine. It's very set, and we and our learners are very secure in the understanding of what that routine is. It's that understanding, isn't it? Of again, this is how we do it here. You come to the class. This is how you enter the class. This is the end routine, the end and send, and this is group work. Whatever the routines that you decide that you need to set in place are consistent and continued to be repeated on a regular basis.
Yeah, and it's about it becoming habitual, isn't it? You do things in a certain way every day, and it becomes a habit. You don't have to think about it. They don't have to think about it. You don't have to keep having the same battles about the same things. And I think sometimes you can't tell at the beginning of term what specific things you need to have routines for. And I think if you're finding that specific pupils or several pupils are struggling to move from one thing to another, those are the moments at which maybe a clear routine needs to be developed and embedded and practiced and taught and gone over and over and over. So, you might not think you need a routine for moving into groups and starting group work or doing an activity as a pair, and you might not, but sometimes that might crop up as something you do need.
Packing equipment away or noting down homework at the end of the lesson, just all sorts of things that perhaps we take for granted that they should just know it by now. And we might be right. We might be right that they should just know it, but if they don't, then it becomes our responsibility in our classrooms to convey that message. And I think that once we've separated that and we have absolute certainty that the routine is embedded, then we can look at the saboteurs and deal with them in a very different way. And as Ellie mentioned before, that's more of a scripted response, a planned intervention that we're going to be looking at in weeks 4 and 5 in terms of the follow-up work.
Yes, and then we go back to the point about you have to relentlessly do it. You always do it, so that they know that they are certain of what's going to happen. Because a lot of the time, they'll get away with those behaviours in one class, maybe 80% of the classes they go into, they can get away with it. So they'll do it because they don't have to work so hard if they do that. And that's harder, particularly for children who have literacy issues, low levels of literacy. They possibly lack understanding. It's not exclusively those children, but often we find those, that they struggle with behaviour as well. And a lot of the time it's because it's harder to get on with the work. And
low self-esteems and all sorts of layers. Often the most challenging behaviours come from learners who have layers.
Yeah.
And those layers are the learners kind of sort of expressing them, saying, I don't want to deal with that, so I'm going to behave in this way instead. And I think that we talk a lot about they need boundaries. We need to give children boundaries, and what that really means is the certainty that this is what's going to be happening. It's the routine, and that is the certainty of I can know exactly when I walk into this classroom, this is the expectation for me.
So, Ollie, I wonder if you think this question is similar in a way, although the behaviour is different. So, Rebecca Ann has said, how do you deal with a pupil who's constantly commenting on or questioning what's being taught?
Okay, so I've got to decode that question a little bit, because my first response is, so questioning is great, and commenting and having an opinion is fantastic, and I'm going to welcome that. I'm going to encourage the discussion about what's being taught. But clearly, I don't think Rebecca's meaning that, is she? I think Rebecca's focusing on that irritating, frustrating, tiresome, negative commenting or questioning. Why am I doing this?
Probably trying to get out of actually doing the task by continually asking questions.
Yeah. And so that's what I think I would start with, looking at why is the learner challenging this?
Yeah.
Being challenging is okay. I challenge my learners every day, and I have to accept that they will challenge me back.
Yeah.
And that becomes a two-way thing. I can't challenge them if I don't accept the challenge myself. I would think about why are they doing this? Why are they questioning? What is it about that they're trying to avoid? What is it they disagree with? And really try to tap into that. And then my first thoughts sort of start to think about the amount of time that the teachers talk. How much time are you spending giving information to your learners? Maybe it's too much. Maybe that you need to be much more concise with the way in which you communicate the information, the expectations. So here's the thing, for a teacher, maybe get a colleague and get them to time you on how much time in one lesson period, how much time have you spent talking? Now, I know I'm a talker, and I have to do this quite a lot when I'm working with learners. I have to have the little voice that says, just simplify it. Less is more. You don't have to go into a 5-minute explanation if you can just do it in 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
Yep.
And so I would absolutely get someone to time you. If you're really brave, get a trusted learner to do it and have that two-way. Maybe the one that's questioning you, if you've got a positive relationship with them as well.
They'll at least have a focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yes, welcome questioning, encourage questioning, but at the same time, just think about what are you doing and what can you change that perhaps could flip that around, that expectation. So the learner doesn't want to challenge you so much. What they want to do is they want to embrace what you're providing for them.
And I think it's particularly relevant, as we've been talking about managing your own behaviour, that we go over, that we emphasise the fact that you can't control the behaviours of anyone else. You can only control your own. So you are reliant upon influence. So whilst you may feel very keenly inside that they really need.
It's them. Yes. They're wrong. They're wrong, and they need to change. And I think that's absolutely key. Is that and again, you might be right.
Yeah.
But being right doesn't help you in your situation.
And that's the key thing. And you have to train yourself to respond differently. That's why we need emotional control. You have to evaluate your own performance in a way, or at least be analytical about why this situation is occurring. And that's why having a colleague watching you can sometimes be helpful, because more often than not, we are not aware of these behaviours. We have no idea how much time we demand the attention of the whole class unless we get someone to time it. I mean, when I was teaching, it was exactly the same. I thought maybe I had their attention for 10 minutes and I got somebody to do this and it was a lot longer, and I was shocked. It's the same thing with, you know, the sorts of things we say that we don't know we're saying. So evaluating your own teaching performance and getting somebody to watch you is a useful thing, even though it can be quite frightening sometimes. Okay, good. Right, next question. How do you motivate disinterested, unmotivated learners? Now, this question came from lots of different people in various guises. I was looking down the list of questions and picking out, oh yes, that's the same question really, and it's really difficult. So,
it's the magic question, isn't it? I mean, how do we engage learners more? How do we motivate? How do we inspire? I mean, if we all had the answer to that fully, then I think the situation would be quite different. But I think what it comes down to is, well, what does engage them? What does motivate them? Yeah. You know, what is important to those learners? Why are they disengaged? Why is it because, like we mentioned earlier, that they're afraid of getting it wrong? Is it because they've got other layers that are going on? What's contributing to their apathy? And we might not ever fully get that answer, but starting to investigate will help us start to problem solve and to strategize about what we can do to move forward. Yeah. I think the idea that our classrooms, you know, we've moved away from this Victorian model of chalk and talk, where the teacher is owner of knowledge, and it's mine, and I will give it to you. I'll impart my knowledge onto you unless you misbehave. You're talking, you can't have it, it's mine. I mean, there's this odd notion that I own the knowledge and I will give it to you if you are fortunate enough. Well, that's gone away now. Knowledge isn't mine, it's all of ours. Knowledge just exists. And so my job as an educator isn't to give my learners knowledge, it's to create and facilitate environments where they discover knowledge for themselves. So if I can provide opportunities for my learners to self-discover and empower them to own the knowledge themselves, then I think that goes quite a long way for motivation and engagement.
And I think it also relates to what we've been talking about in terms of building relationships, you know, and making sure the children, that the learners know that you're bothered about them. Children, if they, you know, young people, teenagers, whatever age of learners, they will be engaged with people that they feel care about them a lot more than if they feel that they don't. So I suggest that when you focus on those strategies of, you know, the meet and greet, that all those sort of culture developments where you're managing, you know, and improving the relationships in the classroom, and you're building trust between you and the learners, that those things will improve as, you know.
Absolutely.
And the other thing, Ollie, is that, you know, if they're not engaging with you, who are they engaging with?
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was going to say. Is that you know, are they apathetic across the board, or are there some teachers or some subjects that they do feel motivated with, that they are inspired or engaged by? What are those teachers doing? What is it about that subject? What is it about that situation that allows the learners to buy in and not in yours or in a different subject?
And you can go and watch those teachers teaching. You can go and speak to those teachers about what it is they're doing. You can ask who has, you know, you can, in the staff room, you can ask who has a good relationship with this child. What is it? What do they like? I want to get in to find what makes that child tick, because then you can start tapping into that in your own class. I remember I taught this child. He was, I mean, it was so hard to get through to him, and he put up so many barriers. And in the end, I discovered that he was really good at throwing. And he wasn't particularly good at anything else. He had very low literacy levels, and it was in a really deprived area. But he had an amazing throw. Like, it was incredible. And now, in my subject, which was drama, there weren't very many opportunities for throwing things around the room. There possibly more than there would have been in maths or something. But I spoke to the PE teachers, and I made sure that I found out whenever he was doing competitions, so that I could ask him at the door, how did it go? What, you know, did you know, are you improving? Or I made sure that I spoke to those PE teachers and found out when he'd beaten his personal best. so that it's something that I could talk to him about, and he became engaged with me, and then in the learning. So I think that's really important. And we also talk about, that there are those students that just don't have anything with any teacher, any kind of engagement, and sometimes we have to put a hook into those students and make up something that they're good at, don't we?
A metaphorical hook.
Yeah, no, not an actual fish hook or something. But we talk about sometimes, you'll have to, you can say you're really good at that, and then you keep going. You go and speak to some other teachers and say, just make sure you reinforce the message that you've heard that James is really good at drama, that he did a brilliant performance.
I think that's absolutely key. And again, that comes a cultural thing. Is that again? It sort of makes me think of a learner that I used to work with who just had a complete disconnect from every subject.
Yeah.
He walked around. He had a big frown on his face, and even if you mentioned his name in the staff room, the other sort of colleagues would say, "What
energy?"
And they put his face,
okay.
and they'd all. He was known by his frown, known by his complete, and the distance that he created. And so what I said is, I said to every member of staff, so can you just notice when he's not frowning? Yeah. Can you look for the moments? He doesn't solidly frown. I mean, maybe he was just thinking. Maybe that's his thinking face. But could you just notice when he doesn't frown and just say, "What a lovely smile you've got. You look really well today." And within a week, he was walking around the corridors, smiling, beaming at every single member of staff. And within 2 or 3 weeks, his apathy changed because he had started to identify himself as the miserable one, the disengaged one, the unhappy one, because that's how everyone saw him.
Yeah, you have to challenge those negative.
And you challenge those negative internal loops.
Monologues. Brilliant. Thank you, Ollie. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you very much, everybody, for being involved in the webinar this evening. Don't forget that we're going to be doing another one, so please keep those questions coming. We'll answer as many as we possibly can on the next webinar. And if you want any specific support, you can always send us an email and we'll do our best to get to you. All right. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye.